In the latest episode of Counterpoints, which I'll link up there, I predicted, along with Yanko actually, that in the teams in Group A, which is very stacked actually, that NIP would be the team who finished fourth and didn't make the playoffs. And this has in fact happened. They will not be in the playoffs of EPICENTER. Yet, I'm not happy about this whatsoever because of the nature of how they finished fourth. I don't think that using a proper rule set, it's actually possible we can determine they were the worst team in this group and that they are the team who should not be in the playoffs. So NIP at this tournament, EPICENTER, has won just as many games as every team that's going to the playoffs from their group, and they have only lost just as many games as every team that's going to the playoffs from their group. This is a terrible format. Now, the reason why they are going out in the group stage at this point in time is because of the tiebreaker rules. Since this is a round-robin group, and they use tiebreakers, which are some sort of arbitrary criteria, not another match to be played, the tiebreaker rules go like this. First of all, head-to-head record. So if this had been a tie between just two teams and all the teams in the group hadn't tied, then it would be whether, say it was G2 and NIP, it would be whether or not they'd drawn, or whether NIP had won 2-0, or whether G2 had won 2-0. That would be the first thing that decided. I don't like that personally, by the way, in itself. But now, when there's no tiebreaker on head-to-head, we have to go to the second criterion. Now, the second criterion is actually round score in the group. So in this particular scenario, since everyone was tied head-to-head, 1-1 everyone, it comes down to the fact that NIP didn't get enough rounds. If NIP had gotten, I think they had to get 12 rounds or 11 rounds in that last map, then they would have gone through. And since they didn't, they got smashed 16-3 on Overpass. They go out of the group because of round score. Now that is bullshit and is massively unfair, as I will go on to explain later in this video. So in terms of the concept of tiebreakers in general, after watching years of esports games and watching all different styles of tiebreaker criteria brought in to try and solve ties without playing matches, I have not seen a reasonable criterion ever found to eliminate a team based without playing more games, just based on some factor of how they played. I've never seen one so far. I mean, the best you can sort of get is in games where you play like best of 3 series and then you say like total game score. So for example, if someone won 2-0, they get rewarded over someone who only won 2-1. Like I can almost get my way to that one, but even then I still feel like the most reasonable one, bearing in mind it might be game score against other opponents, etc. I still feel like the actual overall tiebreaker seems to be the only reasonable one is to play games again. This is what they used to do in a lot of the Korean competitions. So there's no argument can be had. You play the person you're tied against, the winner goes through. I think this is the only actual tiebreaker that I consider acceptable or legitimate or something that should be a reasonable use in esports. I haven't seen any arguments against it aside from it takes more time. And I haven't seen any good arguments to explain why other criteria is better to eliminate than just playing a match. Now, there was an interesting point made in a series of articles, which maybe I'll link below if I can find them, on Team Liquid, that StuTube pointed me to, by a guy called Mott Bob, who was a famous, like a fairly well-known user on Team Liquid. And he talks about tiebreakers and what he thinks are the best. Now, he makes a good distinction that maybe you can use tiebreakers in scenarios where, so for example, head-to-head or game score or whatever, you can maybe use those tiebreakers when you're only determining seeds for the playoffs. Let's say only 2 teams are tied and then the top 2 teams in the group, or top players, and they're both going through anyway, and so all you're determining is the seeding. Now, I would still argue, I think that's a bit unfair because you might get an incredibly hard bracket as a result, but at least you're both going on. The tiebreaker isn't eliminating you from the competition. When you're eliminating from someone from the competition, it feels like at the moment, unless someone cracks the atom and comes up with an amazing tiebreaker rule, like you should have to play again, so that you know you went out because you actually lost matches, not just because of some weird criterion. Because one of the key details, as we're going to get into, is that when the criterion is something like head-to-head or round score or game score, this is something that from your first matches in the tournament you aren't thinking about, and really you can't be thinking about. You can't be planning like if this is going to happen and that you have to win this scenario here. So as a result, I feel like it's kind of capricious and unreasonable to eliminate something over someone over something that they couldn't have had in mind and couldn't have prepared for in that particular sense. If they just lose, okay, that's fine. But if it's something weird like this, even the person going through on game score isn't necessarily thinking when they go into the game, I've got to close it out here so I can get the good game. No, and you can't really think that way. That's not the way the game is currently played in our system. It's not about rounds, it's about winning the game and winning the map, and you play to win the map. So one of the problems I have is I personally don't like head-to-head. I don't think that's good either, because my problem with head-to-head is when you get a tie only between 2 teams, then what happens is If one team won 2-0 over the other one, they go through because they're head-to-head, right? Everyone will say, yeah, that's fine, totally reasonable, right? No, why is it? Why should this team be rewarded just for winning against one specific opponent when, for example, the opponent that they beat, who is now eliminated, might have won more games against the team that's the first-place team? Why does that not count? Meanwhile, the team that they're playing might have just won all their games against the eliminated team, like the fourth place team, who's the worst one, in a group where 2 and 3, only second goes out and third goes out. See, in this scenario, I think that's capricious. I think that's like a completely arbitrary, but doesn't even have that much rationale to it. Like, I actually value wins against the top place team more than wins against the lower place team, but you're ignoring that completely. So I don't like head-to-head anyway. But in this scenario, we're not talking about head-to-head. We're talking about round score, because that's what happened here. Now, I actually think round score is one of the worst tiebreaker criterion I can think of possible in Counter-Strike. Now, the only one I can think of that could be worse is one that was actually applied to League of Legends in the early days. I mean, famously, it happened at IEM Katowice, I think it was the 7th season, so in January of 2013, where they used how fast teams had won their games. So that when you go into the last game, Gambit knew they had to win really fast against, I think it was like MYM or something. Now, that is ridiculous. That is almost patently absurd because, again, you can't be playing the first game knowing that you have to close out fast. And again, it'd be ridiculous there because what champions do you have? What composition do you have? That's not the way the styles of the game work. You can't just, it's not just the fastest team is the best. No. So likewise, round score is basically our equivalent of it because no one's going to do time in Counter-Strike, especially because we have timeouts. I think round score is the worst possible criteria you can come up with to eliminate a team in tie-breaking. I mean, for a start off, just in terms of how it affects the tournament, that means that on the last map where NiP knew they didn't have to win the map, they only had to get to the 12 rounds. That means NiP isn't even playing to win at that point in time. They can now play in a manner that no one would play a game otherwise, but because of this foreknowledge, they will play in a very weird way that isn't Counter-Strike. So what they'll play is, they'll play just to get to the 12 rounds. So if the opponent's winning and the score's really blown out, and there's a situation where they could force buy, and in a game that they had to win, they would force buy to try and get back in the game and turn the momentum and make the rest of the rounds not super, super hard. In this scenario, actually, this format encourages them not to force buy, to save, knowing that at any point in time when you get to a full gun round, in theory, that gives you a better chance to pile up lots of gun rounds and get to the 12 rounds because you're not trying to get to 16. Now, that is a massive flaw in a tournament because it's going to lead to teams playing no longer a Counter-Strike match, a competitive Counter-Strike match. Now they're playing this very weird system where it's just about me getting to this number and you not letting them get to that number, and then maybe as a result, the other team has to play weird and play extra safe or something. You know, you're just going to pervert the entire concept of what a normal Counter-Strike match is, whereas really the tiebreaker should be we play Counter-Strike normally, and at the end, if people are tied, we play a match to see who goes through in that scenario. Now, another reason why round score is ridiculous is because we're counting these rounds where it's just if this number is bigger than this one and the differential is bigger than this one, you win. That's ridiculous because we didn't all play in equal circumstances, yet we're just treating the numbers equally. These are not identical numbers in the same sense of how they were produced. So we did not play the same maps against the same opponents. We didn't start on the same side of the same maps against the same opponents. Now, these are all massive, important, significant pieces of context when you're talking about what rounds will be yielded from a match. I mean, there are certain maps that are incredibly CT-sided. Certain maps are very T-sided. Certain maps are very even. And as a result, some maps are going to give you a much better chance of winning by a big score. Some maps are going to be very likely that you'll have a close score. So, for example, bearing in mind the side you start on, if somebody picks, for example, Cobblestone against you, and they're amazing on Cobblestone, but you're a pretty good team on Cobblestone, and you get to pick to go T-side, now you've got a mega chance of getting to double digits, an incredibly high chance of getting there. So in this tournament, there were 6 Cobblestone games so far. Fnatic hasn't played the last match yet, but 6 Cobblestone games were played so far in this tournament. And in all but one of the 6, the game went to double digits for the loser. The loser got at least 10 rounds. And the one time it didn't happen was the biggest mismatch of the tournament, which was SK Gaming. Some people still consider them the best team in the world against Hellraisers, easily the lowest ranked team in this tournament. So the only one time it didn't happen was the outlier anyway, the biggest mismatch. In every other scenario, anyone who played Cobblestone, it went to double digits for the loser. And of the 4 times, that's of the 6 times, okay? Let me think. So there were 6 games played, and in 4 of the 6, so 75% of occasions, the loser of the game started on CT side. Now that isn't why they lost the game, but the point is, if you go onto CT side, then you start on CT side, the odds of the opponent getting to 10 rounds on cobblestone in a whole game is incredibly large, because T-side, in theory, when you're a good cobblestone team, is the dominant side. They're starting on T-side. If you even hold them to 8 rounds, you had a fantastic CT half, if you get 7 rounds. Well, then you have to just close the game out perfectly to stop them getting 2 rounds, basically, to get to the 10. So you can see how cobblestone already is a mega problematic map. Then add in that 2 of the maps most likely to yield double-digit scores for the opponent are cobblestone and cash. These are 2 of the maps most likely, and they are also 2 of the maps that so few teams ban and that are very likely to get out there. So many teams in this tournament willing to play those maps. Meanwhile, maps like, for example, Nuke or Cobblestone or Overpass, those are maps where if you get the right start as CT, you can absolutely win these maps 16-4, 16-5. You can stop someone getting anywhere. Someone could have a really good game against you on Nuke and actually only get 9 rounds overall and not get to 10. So we can see already in a system where we're just counting the differential and the overall number, this is very flawed because we're playing different maps, and crucially we're starting on different sides of the maps. That's another key detail. And there is no way to know this criteria, come into the tournament and plan accordingly, because to do so would also ruin the tournament, by the way. We want teams that are both good on cobblestone to allow cobblestone to come through and then have a battle and play on it. Whereas instead, in this sort of a rule scenario, one team should just gamble and go, right, I want Nuke in here instead, actually, ideally. So let's try and get to Nuke or some other map that maybe both of us are bad at, but hopefully I get the CT start and I just win 16-5. That's not good Counter-Strike. It doesn't promote good Counter-Strike. The good thing about a good structure is you put it in place and you'll just get good matches out there. If you have a bad structure, you have to hope and pray certain things don't happen, and actually hope and pray that everything sort of goes right, and then you get a good tournament still. Good formats yield good matches. Bad formats yield bad matches or make it very difficult for good matches to happen as frequently. Now, I understand that some tournament organizers don't have a lot of time. And this tournament here, it takes a week. But in some tournaments, like the classic ones, your DreamHack type scenario in the past, a tournament would be played over 3 days. Okay, so in that kind of a scenario, you can say, but I don't have time as the tournament organizer to run an extra tiebreaker match. Then don't use this format, because we have other formats that do not require tiebreakers. So if you know you don't have the time, don't use this format. If you do have the time, then use a real tiebreaker match. Now, I will say, this Epicenter example is the most egregious, because since every team was tied here, in all the matches, by the way, very unlikely, but there was an insane amount of parity, then in this scenario, the tiebreakers would essentially have to be everyone playing again in the group. That's very problematic, I will totally acknowledge, although you can have more play best of 1. But that is a really difficult scenario compared to if just 2 teams are tied, you have them play 1 match and then the winner goes through. I will say that's extremely dangerous, but that's also personally why I would never use round robin. I hate round robin. I'm so glad it's gone from Counter-Strike, and I'm sad it's actually coming back now. So here's the problem. I will say this to Epicenter's credit, okay? Even though I don't like the format, I don't think you should do it because this can happen. In general, it is quite unlikely this would have happened anyway. Like, if there had been less parity in the group, it's very unlikely every team would have drawn. That's already ridiculous. That's the problem. The group was too stacked. Then you got to add in, if you just put in one bad team. So, for example, like Hellraisers in the other team group, say you put in Echo Fox instead of Nip in this group. Now there will be no problem. Now there will definitely be a team winning the group clearly. At worst, maybe the second and third teams would tie still. And if they tie, actually in Epicenter's format, it wouldn't even be anything to really cry about. Because if you're tied and some tiebreaker criterion like this, like round score, head-to-head, is what's used, and you end up being second or third, well, luckily in this format, you don't skip. You're both going to be in the first round of the playoffs anyway. It's just which side of the bracket you're on. And ultimately, that's fairly negligible since you're still starting at the same point in the tournament, and you're not really getting a harder opponent, really, because actually both teams were pretty well balanced in terms of the best teams in it. So I don't think that would be as big a problem. So under all other circumstances, Epicenter would have got away with this. This wouldn't be something that would be a massive problem. But since it has gone so badly, I wanted to highlight the big problems here. Because the thing is, we had these problems almost every tournament in 1.6. There would be draws. And by the way, if everyone drew a lot, then it would fuck the whole tournament, because then someone just gets the odd win and then they're definitely through, and then other teams are on this weird tiebreaker criteria. We've had this happen many times, and I've always hated it. Head-to-head, like I've said, is just as bad. I've seen many scenarios where that happened that I really didn't like. I mean, and a good example at the top of my head would be in 2011. I think it was IEM... Which IEM would it be? IEM 6 Gwangju, I think, where... I believe it was where Fnatic went through in Group A, whereas the Danish team, like basically I think it was like the full gaming type team, had actually got some sort of upset over the winner of the group and then still didn't go through anyway. Some scenario like that, you'd have to look it up, but a similar scenario, and they went off head-to-head there, and therefore the other team went through. Didn't like it then, don't like it now. Now, I will say, this is one of the things that tilts me, because we got rid of this in CS. This wasn't a problem in CS for the last few years. You know why? Thanks in part to Lurpus making that article about GSL style, which by the way actually existed in the MSL and other competitions in the past, where you play a little double elim bracket inside the group. And so every tournament, the majors adopted that, and so every other tournament adopted it. I think it started actually with DreamHack Summer 2014. We adopted this system, and yes, this system has its own flaws. You don't play everyone in the group. You can go out by playing only 2 matches. People can call these flaws. The difference is, those flaws are very arguable, and they're more just like bad circumstances for one team. In this scenario here, I think it's a massive flaw to allow these ties that have egregious things where a team goes through that doesn't necessarily deserve it, and a team goes out that hasn't really been beaten properly. So the good thing about GSL style groups is there are no ties possible. And as a result, no tiebreakers needed. The first place team is determined, the fourth place team is determined, and then the second and the third place team play a match to determine who becomes the second place team for the actual playoffs. It's a great system for this sort of tournament, and if you don't have time, that's the key detail. It's actually less matches played than we played in the group stage here at EPICENTER. So if you don't have time and you can't do tiebreakers, run GSL style. You solve all your problems. Round Robin at the moment is very problematic, and these things will continue to happen, admittedly not in as egregious a scenario as this where everyone's tied, but they will continue to happen. And there is so far, as yet, no good or reasonable tiebreaker system created so far. So I feel very sorry for them. I don't think they should be out at this point in time. I think they should be playing someone again. And I think that this is a bad system to use in general.